One day, SHIELD scientists in the Arctic found the wreckage of a large plane. Inside, the two discovered a frozen object with 3 red, white and blue rings and a white star in the middle. Seeing this, a person asked to immediately inform the colonel. "What is that object? Let's go back to the source of the story." In March 1942, Nazi officer Johann Schmidt and his men attacked a church in Tonsberg, Norway, to steal the Tesseract cube, what Schmidt called Odin's treasure. Schmidt is the main antagonist of the film. He can do anything to achieve his goals. During that time, in New York, a Brooklyn guy, Steve Rogers, with a desire to join the army to fight for his country in the Second World War. But he was rejected due to his short stature and many medical history. Rogers was depressed. He went to the cinema to see a movie. Because he couldn't stand an impolite thug, Steve Rogers fell into a fight in an alley. Beaten to pieces, but Rogers' will is very strong, unyielding. Rogers' best friend, Sergeant James "Bucky" Barnes, who later became the Winter Soldier, shows up and kicks the ass of the thug who bullied his friend. Bucky announces his acceptance into the division, and advises Rogers not to try anymore. Bucky Barnes invited Rogers to the exhibition, Modern Technology for the Future, where famous inventor Howard Stark, father of Tony Stark, introduced an experimental flying car. Rogers enlisted in another recruiting center, while his skeleton was not as tall as his will. As Barnes was trying to convince him to give up, Rogers' hatred of bullies was discovered by accident German Dr. Abraham Erskine, who was working with the U.S. Strategic Science Reserve. He specially recruited Rogers into a squad of soldiers stationed at Camp Lehigh, New York State. There, under Colonel Chester Phillips and SSR officer Peggy Carter, one would be selected for the first, super soldier, test. Here he was beaten by his superiors, tortured by colleagues, and criticized for being physically weak. But Steve Rogers still endured and overcame it all. Thanks to his unyielding qualities, he caught the eye of his superiors. A brave act of self-sacrifice during Rogers' training made Erskine reluctantly choose him. That night, Dr. Erskine comes to talk to Steve, and tells about the ambition of Johann Schmidt, who has taken a prototype super-soldier potion. At the same time, in Europe, Schmidt and scientist Arnim Zola began successfully harnessing the power of the Tesseract. They then send an assassin to eliminate Dr. Abraham Erskine. Steve Rogers is taken by Peggy Carter to a super-soldier drug test, and along the way they talk about many things in life. In a secret laboratory under a second-hand shop in Brooklyn, under the witness of Erskine, Senator Brandt and State Department employee Fred Clemson, Rogers was injected with the serum through micro-needles. And the serum is activated by irradiation, which Erskine calls Vita rays. Rogers came out of the cage with a tall and muscular appearance. The successful experiment surprised everyone. They congratulate each other, and Peggy also shows her eagerness. Rogers' new abilities are put to the test immediately when Clemson, Schmidt's assassin, comes into action. Steals a backup serum, kills Erskine and reveals his true identity as spy Heinz Kruger. Rogers ran to the doctor and accepted his last words. Peggy Carter chases after the assassin, shooting the driver. But the killer stole another car, ran away. Rogers decided to capture Kruger alive instead of letting Peggy Carter kill him. He discovers his extraordinary ability. The assassin took a kid to intimidate, then threw the kid into the river to buy time. But luckily the boy can swim. Rogers continues to chase the assassin trying to escape on a personal submarine. Rogers jumped into the river, swam faster than the submarine, and dragged the assassin ashore. He tried to fight back, but was quickly defeated. He intentionally dropped the serum tube and then committed suicide with a cyanide pill, after revealing his organization was Hydra, which was a branch of Schutzstaffel of Nazi Germany, but revealed a plot to rule the world. With Erskine's death and no serum samples left, the SSR was forced into immediate combat with Hydra. But Rogers was pushed into the lab by Phillips in hopes of recovering Erskine's recipe. Later, Senator Brandt sent Rogers to play the lead role of Captain America on numerous international tours to promote the sale of war bonds. At a concert for American soldiers in Italy in November 1943, Rogers was mocked by the soldiers, and then he began to realize that he had been used as a lab rat and then into a circus monkey. Hearing that Barnes' unit was being taken prisoner by Hydra, Rogers was deeply worried. Despite being opposed by his superiors, Rogers is determined to set out to rescue his friend. Rogers convinced Carter and Stark to fly him directly to the place of detention to perform the hostage rescue alone. Rogers single-handedly parachuted into enemy territory. He broke in with a shield emblazoned with the American flag. Rogers successfully rescues the 107th Army. But Bucky is not here. Rogers quickly went looking. The rescued prisoners created chaos. The leadership of Hydra was surprised with the infiltration of Rogers, a true super soldier. Hydra uses the most modern weapons to attack Rogers. Seeing the situation at a disadvantage, Schmidt decided to flip all the switches, abandon the base, and retreat. Steve Rogers has now found his friend Bucky Barnes. Rogers saved Barnes and the others, and then encountered Schmidt himself, the leader of Hydra, and Dr. Erskine's first super soldier. He is now known as the Red Skull due to a side effect of the prototype serum, burning his face. Schmidt and Zola withdrew after self-destructing the factory. While Carter was worried, and so was the patience of his superiors, Rogers brought all the hostages to the safe base, along with many modern equipment using Tesseract energy. The superiors decided to forgive Rogers. Steve Rogers began to be officially involved in military operations. To destroy the Hydra bases, Rogers recruited a team consisting of Barnes, Timothy, Dum Dum, Duggan, Gabe Jones, Jim Morita, James Montgomery Falsworth and Jacques Dernier, all former American POWs of Hydra. Steve Rogers now begins to fall in love with Carter. Using a circular shield that can absorb any vibrations made of what Stark calls vibranium, Rogers and his team destroyed most of the bases, leaving only the main base unknown. Steve Rogers at this time with his super fighting skills has become a heroic symbol of America. Rogers and Barnes swing onto the train carrying Dr. Zola. During the attack on the ship, Barnes was hit by a new weapon of Hydra and fell into the abyss in the presence of Rogers. With the information Phillips had obtained from Zola, he led the detachment to Skull's final base in the Alps. There he pretended to be surrounded to distract, and was led to Red Skull's place. His comrades from another direction attacked. As the war broke out, Agent Peggy Carter showed off his skilled fighting skills. Red Skull runs away, climbs into the plane and takes the Tesseract with him to plan an attack to level the United States. Rogers climbs into Skull's plane, Valkyrie, after having a romantic farewell kiss with Peggy Carter. Rogers dropped all the small planes so they wouldn't leave, and fought the soldiers of Hydra. Rogers then continued to fight Red Skull on the plane. Red Skull tried to use the Tesseract directly to defeat Steve Rogers, but he couldn't stand its power. The Tesseract melted the fuselage and fell into the sea. The Red Skull was sucked into a portal opened by the Tesseract's energy, leading Rogers to believe he was dead. Due to severe damage to the steering system during the battle, Rogers decided to crash the plane into the North Pole while expressing his intention to date Carter over the phone, leaving an unrelenting feeling of regret. Captain America's sacrifice brought victory for America. Stark finds the Tesseract on the seabed, but the Valkyrie is lost, and Rogers is declared dead in battle. Peggy Carter continues to serve her country in the military, carrying the image of a skinny guy in her heart. In the current scene, Rogers wakes up in a room designed to look like he's still in the 40s. After realizing the truth, he runs out to Times Square and marvels at the sight that doesn't exist at all familiar. S.H.I.E.L.D. director Nick Fury was waiting there and said they wanted him to slowly realize he'd slept for nearly 70 years, and just wanted him to adapt to modern times. Rogers replied that he missed an appointment. In the post-credits scene, Fury gives Rogers a mission to save the New World.